Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Aizawa frowned and rubbed his dry eyes. It was already so late and he still had some paperwork to fill in. Expulsion forms to be exact. Truly, he was dreading his graveyard shift already. Not to mention having to deal with another social outburst for having expelled his entire class again the next day. He sighed, oh well, after a day or three it would all mellow down again. His colleagues knew he only did it to make sure only those who could handle a hero's life would be set out to deal with dangers others couldn't handle. And the media would also broadcast it only once. After that they would have to find new material for their greedy viewers. The parent were always the worst, but he'd live. It wasn't like he was enjoying this, but it was for their own protection. Sure, the new class might have looked good to an untrained eye, but honestly, they hadn't shown enough potential to him. Some of them didn't even work out and only trained their quirks because they were long-range fighters or wouldn't need to resort to CQC because their quirk would save them. He couldn't find a grain of ingenuity among them either. Bar perhaps Minda, who figured out a few ways to make his quirk workable. All of them only used their quirk in the most obvious ways. Well, not in his class they wouldn't. There was one exception, however. Aizawa grinned as he thought about a certain student. The only one who showed he took the heroics class serious. The only one who showed he was determined to become a hero. Who showed ingenuity and being able to make a solution up on the spot. This would be an interesting year. An alarm clock went off and a bleary-eyed Greenette shut it up. He noted, I see I haven't drowned in my own self-pity during my sleep. Groggily, he got up and mechanically went through the motions of his morning routine. I almost can't believe it. After everything I went through, 10 months of hell, the entrance exam that almost killed me and still severely wounded me, all the anxiety and fear and panic. He stifled a sob, and I mess up on the first day. As he left his house, his mind went back to those 5 terrible minutes. The results were shown on a hologram, with Izuku all the way the bottom, the lowest, the dead last. These are your results. Aizawa spoke up as I said. Those whom I deem not to have any right to be in the heroics course will be expelled. These people can expect a phone call later today. Wait, what? A girl with raven hair tied in a ponytail burst out. Why, you're actually going to expel people? Immediately after she said this, she realized her mistake and corrected her form. I mean, sir, the ragged-looking man simply glared at her. I do not make fake promises. I have trained dozens of pro heroes, and if I can't see any potential in you now, the heroics department doesn't need you. Now get dressed and go home. As for you, Midoriya. Izuku tensed up and managed to get out a yes, sir. Get your finger checked out with recovery girl. Izuku sagged both in relief and shame. Yes, sir. And the phone call never came. Maybe the teacher wanted to humiliate and criticize him in person, or maybe even in front of the class. Izuku now stood in front of the strangely quiet classroom of 1A. Maybe he should just leave, crawl in a hole and die so he wouldn't have to face the one person who believed he could be a hero. Who knows, All Might just want OFA back. Then Izuku's chances of becoming a hero would definitely be null. No, he thought, determined, I'm going to face this head on, even if it does entail public humiliation. He confidently slammed the door open and, please don't make so much noise when entering a classroom, immediately became his meek old self again. As sorry, sir, he managed to squeeze out as he took his seat. Only then did he realize they were the only two in the classroom. What was happening? Did the teacher want to confront him person to person after all? Or did the other students have a day off because they passed and he didn't? He was quickly shook out of his muttering. Now then, we can finally begin class, Aizawa said, breaking the silence whilst climbing out of his yellow cocoon. Class, Izuku said, surprised. But sir, what about the rest of the students? And what about me? What about them and you? The groggy teacher said. Now turn to the Greenette. They're not here. Shouldn't we wait on? Well, everyone else. We don't have to wait on them, the tired man said. They're expelled. You heard me. Aizawa quickly cut him off before his student could start his annoying muttering again. They didn't show any promise, so I got rid of them. Hey, and before you ask, no, you're not expelled. Congratulations on being the lone member of Class 1A, Midoriya Izuku. Izuku almost fainted in relief after hearing the school's bell signaling in his lunch period. He quickly gathered all his school items and went for the door on unsteady knees. He had gone through one hell of a day already, and it's only 12:40. After almost having his chest explode out of pride by his teacher explaining to him the reason the Greenette was allowed to stay in UA. Unlike the other students, his excitement quickly mellowed down as he came to a very important realization. He was the only one in 1A. The entire world would be judging him and his actions. UA, as a class, was often considered the best of the heroics due to his producing heroes like All Might and Best Jeanist. Now all those expectations would fall on him. He could live with that, however. All Might was already expecting great things from him, and he'd do his very best to make sure he'd live up to those. The rest of the world came second to that. No, the worst thing is that he wasn't being taught from now on, he'd be tutored. Some would kill to have some of the greatest pro heroes personally teach them the ropes of heroism. Izuku was not among them. The entire homeroom class was just Izuku and Aizawa. Izuku was already terrified of the man, so having him talk directly to the young boy and scolding said boy if he got an answer wrong the entire period was not doing good things for his heart. Izuku would have liked as one other student to join him in class so he wouldn't be the only one facing the intimidating teacher. Izuku also would have liked some friends. Ochako would have been nice to have at my side. And after he apologized, Ida might have also been a good friend in time. Izuku sighed sadly. Hell, I'd even take Kaken at this point. He shivered. He feared the day the explosive blonde found out Izuku was allowed to stay in UA. Unlike him, the mopey greenette opened the classroom door and screamed. Hitoshi Shinsu waited with bated breath in front of 1A's classroom door along with seemingly all of UA, as other students behind him. Tensions were high with all the rumors going about. He'd heard of the rumors. Everyone had at this point, difficult not to have. One, that was the amount of students Class 1A had. Just one. He heard that their homeroom teacher had put all of 1A through some kind of secret, almost impossible to pass test. Only one kid had passed. The rest, not put in general ed, nor punished with extra homework or training. The rest was straight up expulsed. So naturally, as soon as the bell rung, he sprinted out his classroom to see the truth. He could only imagine how crazy strong this kid was. The purple-haired boy had heard that the son of Endeavor and the top scorer on the entrance exam were both expulsed, whereas this student was allowed to stay. To pass a test, the both of those and 17 others had failed. Unbelievable. He shook himself out of his thought when he heard footsteps approaching the door. His throat was dry and his heart was doing its best to burst through his ribcage. The door opened and revealed a rather ordinary-looking guy actually. Shinsu looked directly in the eyes of this so-called Wonder Boy, whose own eyes seemed to widen. The greenette froze up, released some kind of sonic attack and passed out, falling to the floor like a sack of potatoes. The brainwasher could only look at the unconscious boy's body and wonder, what the foo? Izuku opened his eyes only for him to be met with a white ceiling. He groaned as he realized where he was, the infirmary. He groaned harder as he realized how he got here. Great, now everybody in UA knows what a wuss I am. He could only imagine how stupid it must have looked for the only one a student to pass out at the sight of his schoolmates and to have been carried to the infirmary. Or maybe they just let him lay there for him to be picked up by a teacher. He wasn't sure which one was worse and decided to groan once more. Yes, I'm on my way. Have a little patience, an old and strangely high-pitched voice said. Recovery girl. I hope I wasn't too much of a bother to you. Izuku straightened up. Don't worry about it, the tiny hero said, standing by the door having just entered through it. I'm here for a reason, and I'd be boring if nothing happened all day. I'm just happy you didn't break anything this time. She sighed anyway. Your next period starts in 5 minutes, so I'd hurry up and get going if I were you. Oh no, Izuku screeched and ran off to his classroom, being followed by a frustrated and unheard no running in the hallways. Izuku finally made it to his classroom with 1 minute remaining, trying to remember what teacher he'd have this period and what kind of lessons. Before he could sit down or even properly remember, the door burst open. Young Midorya. All Might bellowed, I'm so proud of you. Izuku's face cleared up as he realized what this period was for. Combat training. With All Might no less. To have been the only person in WANA to be approved of by Aizawa is no small feat. All Might flashed Izuku his signature smile. I knew you were the right one to pass my powers to. The greenette beamed as one of his greatest dreams came true, before being squarely hit in the chest by some kind of metal briefcase, knocking the wind out of him. Now then, the blonde continued, suit up and let's go have some combat training. Izuku stood proudly in his uniform opposite to All Might. Once again he was hit with a wave of loneliness as he had went through changing into his hero costume and walking to training ground beta all on his own. But quickly shook it off as the number one hero spoke. Now then, normally I'd pit you against you classmates, but we can't do that now for obvious reasons. So you'll have to settle for me. The boy chalked and coughed at the same time. Fighting one-on-one with All Might. I'll never survive this. Do you remember how we first met? The blonde asked. Of course I do. Izuku almost screamed. It was one of the best days of my life. How were I going to give these pichonver de heroism Shizuoka Prefecture? In not that time. All Might managed to get a word in. After that. You saved me from the sludge villain. The greenette explained. Exactly. I was chasing the sludge villain and only managed to catch up on him because you distracted him. As my successor, you must be quicker than that. No civilian should serve as bait for the hero to catch up on a villain. Therefore, today we're going to train you in just that. The hero explained. Now then, the hero got into a running position. Catch me if you can, and fled from his student at Mach speed. Izuku could only stare pitifully at the place where his teacher stood a second ago before starting a hopeless chase. This is crazy, Izuku thought. He was severely out of breath and his sweaty hair was matted to his forehead. How am I ever supposed to get even remotely close to the number one pro hero? And even if I do catch up to him, how am I supposed to restrain him? The lesson had been going on for half an hour, and the entire time Izuku had been chasing after what felt like All Might's afterimage. When he thought about it, it kind of felt like the hero was just playing with him, like a cat with a mouse. All Might was merciful enough to occasionally slow down or stop for Izuku to catch up so the greenette wouldn't completely lose the man. But then the blonde would rocket off again and Izuku was left behind. So the greenette had taken a break. A tired hero was a dead weight, and a dead tired hero. Worthless. Still though, he could hear his teacher make noise in the distance, probably to make sure Izuku could at least find him, but to Izuku it was like the man was taunting him. There has to be something I can do. Izuku thought back to Aizawa's praise. This is getting me nowhere. Ingenuity is my weapon. Maybe I could lure him into a trap. Though, he would never fall for that. And even if he did, I doubt I can make a trap sturdy enough to restrain a man like All Might. There was something Izuku hadn't tried yet for obvious reasons, his quirk. Even if I only focus my power on one of my toes, I only have that many toes. On top of that, I don't think the sudden unrestrained speed boost would go over well with the rest of my body. Not to mention the broken toe would slow me down. Izuku's mind went back to the egg in the microwave. All Might's eggshell is strong, but mine isn't, so I can't use my quirk like he can. I've tried to limit the time. I can only focus power on parts of my body, but that's a no-go as well. Izuku froze. But what if I dim the temperature down? Immediately Izuku got up and summoned OFA. He could feel the power under his skin, barely restrained. He focused all power on his legs. He could feel it. There was a humongous pressure on his legs. It wasn't painful, but it was still overwhelming and intimidating. Before I summoned all the power I could get out of OFA and forced it through my arm or finger, the greenette concentrated. But what if He imagined a river of power under his skin. The river was currently flooding, so he increased the speed at which it ran. He could feel the power, the pressure ebb away. More, until only a fraction remained. Izuku took a step, or rather, that's what he was planning to do. Instead, he lunged several feet ahead, did a graceful backspin, and skillfully broke his fall with his face on the pavement. However, the grin he had when he got back up and inspected his perfectly intact legs could not be beat. There were still a few problems, like how he couldn't lessen the power output anymore, making it difficult to limit his distance and control his movement. On top of that, he also lost his concentration after jumping. Not enough to truly lose control of the power and still break his legs, but enough so that he subconsciously had the river retreat back to wherever it came from. And thus Izuku was hit by another realization. He was both shortening the cooking time on the egg as well as dimmed down the temperature. But maybe, just maybe, he had dimmed down the temperature enough to allow a longer cooking time. He resummoned the river and guided it along his legs, arms, head, and chest. He didn't even have to make it run faster. All the power was equally divided among his body parts. It felt like, now that he had guided it once, the river was able to run on its own. He barely had to think about it anymore. And now for the power restriction, he thought. He tried to make the river run faster, but that only made him almost lose control, so that was a no-go. Izuku growled and sat back down, calming the power within him. 20 more minutes, he thought. Finally, he realized that OFA wasn't actually that unique of a quirk. Sure, its raw power was unbeatable, and the fact it could be passed down like a torch was more than just a side knot. But in the end, it was just a strength enhancer. So his mind went back to its primal state, hero analysis. He made mental list of heroes with enhanced strength, but most of them were too slow to actually serve as example. He then carried on to heroes who had speed enhancers, like Ingenium. But heroes like that had more control over their quirks. Finally, he got to heroes who moved in strange ways. Swinging, hopping, flying, zigzag. Izuku froze, Gran Torino, and grinned. All Might was bored, and normally when a villain was bored he'd start doing bad stuff, villainous stuff. Murdering, maiming, kidnapping, jaywalking. Despicable villainous stuff. But he was playing an intimidated, fleeing villain, not an aggressive one. So instead he took the time to ponder on how his lesson had gone thus far. As soon as the blonde had started the lesson, he realized he messed up. He completely forgot to give Izuku the capture tape. He also hadn't put a time limit down or shown an objective except "come chase me." It simply slipped his mind. After hearing that his successor was the only one who had survived Aizawa's wrath, he had been so proud he hadn't even thought about changing the lesson plans to compensate with 19 absentees. Sure, he was holding back and let young Midoriya catch up to him every now and then, but he couldn't make it too easy for the boy. The giant sighed. Maybe he should call off the lesson and try something else. He apparently wasn't cut out for this teaching stuff. He shuddered. Maybe he should ask his old sensei for help. Those thoughts were chased away when he caught something with his eyes. Something fast and hopping from building to B. All Might had to repress a panic attack. No. He's not here. He is enjoying retirement. All Might paused. He is not green. The hero was in fact so distracted by his thoughts he actually almost got hit, but he managed to dodge. He looked at the Yellow Devil's impersonator and realized it was his student. "Time to put you behind bars, villain," Izuku said with a confident smile and lunged for the adult once more. This time All Might dodged with ease but was still impressed seeing his student jump from wall to wall, keeping his speed up. It's been such a short time, and already he can use a part of OFA's strength without any noticeable backlash. All Might's ever-vigilant smile threatened to split his face in two. "You've shown you can catch up to me, hero trash, but can you keep up with me?" He bellowed and jumped off again. But as time, when he looked over his shoulder, he could see a green blur giving chase. Izuku let out a sigh, sitting against a wall in a random alleyway. His entire body hurt, his feet and legs especially, but it was a good kind of hurt. It was a sign of hard work and progress. About 20 minutes after he started to keep up with All Might, they decided to take a break, and boy was he grateful for that. He might be able to use OFA without breaking his bones, but the power still demanded a heavy toll, tearing his muscle fibers apart instead. "Well done, young Midoriya." Izuku looked up at his teacher, who was leaning on a dumpster. "I'm impressed by how fast you picked up on using OFA at a lower percentage. It took me several months to figure that out. Well, if it wasn't for your lesson plan, I'd have probably never figured it out," showing that a hero not only needs to be strong, but also needs to last long in the field. "I bet this was all just part of your plan." Izuku sent the blonde a beaming smile. "Thank you, All Might. You really are a great teacher." All Might coughed guiltily and nodded. Well, yes, of course. Anyway, you'd better get checked out at Recovery Girl. While I can't see any obvious injuries on you, I think it'd be best to let a professional be the judge of that." Izuku nodded and left for Recovery Girl's office, where he soon faced a very angry doctor. "Don't tell me you broke something again. You woke up from unconsciousness only about an hour ago and now you're back already. The tiny elders complained when I said it'd be boring if nothing happened. I didn't mean to encourage self-harm." "And no, it's not that. It's just, I think I figured out how to use my quirk without backlash, but my body still hurts." Recovery Girl paused and then smiled warmly at him. "Why didn't you say so immediately? If you really can use your quirk without damaging yourself, it would be an amazing milestone. Now, come in, let's take a look at you." After a quick checkup, Recovery Girl decided that all Izuku suffered from was sore muscles and gave him a quick kiss. "What an amazing quirk. I'd highly suggest you use it as much as possible." After receiving a questioning look from Izuku, the petite woman continued. "In the first couple of months after receiving a quirk, a person is advised to use it as much as possible. After all, the quirk may be part of the body, but its activation is still a drastic change. The more a person uses their quirk, the more control they have over it. The more the quirk adjusts to a person's body, and the more a person's body adjusts to their quirk. This is especially the case with you, Midoriya. After all, the more you use your quirk, the more you'll be able to control how much force you use, but your quirk also tears your muscles apart. That might sound intimidating, but you know how muscles work, right? The more heavy work you do, the more a muscle gets overloaded and the more muscle fibers break, which then grow back stronger. This allows you to use more power next time, breaking more muscle fibers, etc. This, however, is not the case with bones, so don't go over using your power again." Izuku made a perfect O face. This was basically a shortcut. He could use his quirk to do heavy lifting, rest a day, allowing his muscles to heal, and then do even heavier lifting. And with Recovery Girl around, his muscles would heal overnight. His power would increase exponentially. He stood up and winced at the pain in his everything. Okay, maybe not exponentially. He left the infirmary and headed for his next period. Sadly, the rest of the day was more like a drag in comparison with his combat training. Finally, the final bell rang and Izuku left for home. It had been a long day. Finding out he was the lone member of 1A, passing out in front of his schoolmates, combat training with All Might, being healed by Recovery Girl, and after that more regular school work. He almost couldn't believe it had been only one day, his second day, and certainly not his last. Izuku was standing outside of the school and looked back. This was it. This was his Hero Academia, and his very first step on the road of becoming a hero. I wonder how Kaken is doing. It was a strange thought, and it came out of nowhere, but he couldn't help but wonder. Did his old bully go to a different hero school? He couldn't imagine Kaken being anything other than a hero after all. Another social outrage was started by the infamous pro-hero and teacher at UA, Eraserhead. While being known by few, he similarly sparked an outrage last year at the hero school by expelling his entire homeroom class of 1A. This year, however, he decided to expel all but one student, known as Midoriya Izuku. This baffled many, as this year in his class the teacher had students like the number 2 pro-hero Endeavor's son as well as the top scorer of the entrance exam. While Midoriya was well known to be quirkless for the greater part of his life, only receiving it months, weeks, days, or even moments before the entrance exam's practical segment. Riku, what do you think of Thai? Somewhere, in Shikzu's dormitories, a television was shut off, and an angry growl was heard. Deku, Shikzu sucked. The very same day Katsuki got the damn phone call, the blonde immediately called the second greatest hero school in the country and was allowed entrance on the spot. Several hours later, Katsuki had said goodbye to his parents and moved into the dormitories of the school. Why the hell does a high school even have dormitories? Honestly, as soon as he started school the next day, he knew he fucked up. The uniform was ridiculous and he was immediately scolded by 3 people about not wearing it properly. It was like he enlisted in the fucking military. It was too late when he figured out that Shiksu was a hell of a lot more strict than Yue. And Katsuki's rough personality wasn't exactly appreciated. And now that he's finally done with all that bullcrap, he hears of this. Katsuki was beyond murderous. How dare he? How dare that Deku try to surpass him and succeed? This was wrong. It had to be. There was no way that quirkless nobody was better than him in any way, shape, or form. He was already on his way to the door, ready to prove it, when he realized it wouldn't change much beating the shit out of Deku now or later. He was still expelled from UA, and he might even get more crap from his teachers than he was already getting if he did so now. But then a malicious grin found itself on his face. Fine then, I'll beat the shit out of him later. UA and Shiksu are rivaling schools after all. No, I won't beat him. I'll absolutely humiliate him and show the world just how much of an idiot that eraserhead guy was to pass me up. Katsuki grinned evilly as he came up with plans, tactics, and training regiments, anything that would add to his power. Tenya Ida nodded approvingly to the news. A boy? No. A hero like Midoriya-sen deserves to be in UA. Of course, Tenya didn't blame or hate the Greenette for not being expulsed. Sure, he was upset about being expulsed. The shame he felt when the phone call came and still burned deeply within him. However, his ever-vigilant brother didn't let him down and got him a spot in Shiksu High School. And Tenya honestly had to say he preferred his new school to UA. There are no logic ruses or secret points, but order and dignity. Sure, the fact that the rude blonde from UA also got in his class put a dimmer on his happiness. But he soon found new friends like Seiji who wholeheartedly agreed with Tenya on many subjects around heroism. However, just because Tenya recognized Midoriya as a better person didn't mean he intended to keep it that way. I will catch up to you, Midoriya-san. Uraraka smiled brightly at the radio message. Amazing. Deku-kun actually got in. A brief wave of disappointment hit her as she remembered that she did not. But that was okay. Even low to mid-popular heroes made enough money for 3, especially rescue heroes with a quirks as viable as hers. Deku would make an amazing hero in time, she was sure of it. In the meantime, she was nice and comfy in Ketsubutsu Academy. No scary teachers, crazy entrance exams that almost killed her, rude students, or threats of expulsion on the first day. I almost feel bad for Deku. And she should, because somewhere in a little bar a red-eyed man was smiling viscously at the television hanging from the ceiling. Hirajiri, call Jiren. Tell him we won't need the cannon fodder anymore. Izuku yawned. He was so tired. He almost thought some of his tiredness from yesterday carried over to today, but he was quickly woken up once he stood in front of his school. Excuse me, can you tell me what being taught by All Might is like? And what about the lone student of 1A? A loud brunette all but calmly yelled at him, shoving a microphone into his face. Oh, I am sorry, but I gotta get to the infirmary. Izuku quickly made up, suddenly very much aware of all the cameras pointed at him. All too eager to leave the media behind, he quickly made his way through the human barricade onto UA's school ground. The female reporter growled as she looked at the quickly retreating back of the boy. None wanted to answer her questions. Either they were teachers who told them to leave, or students who didn't know better. She was broken out of her self-pity session when her cameraman remarked that the kid who just left them behind looked an awful lot like Izuku Midoriya. She quickly thought about what the boy had looked like again. First year, check. Green, curly hair, check. Green eyes and admittedly cute little freckles dotting his face. Once more, check. Oh hey, wait up. Mr. Midoriya, please answer some of our questions. She attempted to pursue, but was quickly blocked by multiple black steel barriers popping up out of the ground. What the hell? Her colleague quickly filled her in. That's the UA barrier, at least, that's what we call it. There's no getting past that. He said, are you serious? We only want them to answer some of our questions. The woman sighed exasperatedly. Izuku was once again in his safe, albeit empty, classroom. His homeroom teacher was muttering some things about what was on the planning, but Izuku ignored it mostly. The only thing really standing out was when Izuku vaguely heard his teacher mutter something about a class president. Look up at Izuku, looked down again and scribbled something down on some forms. Weird. But no matter what, school will be school, and soon Izuku was being taught once more how to be a hero. When the bell rang signaling lunch, Izuku realized it was time for something he equally was looking forward to as well as dreading. Socializing time. He needed to make some friends. He couldn't go his entire school career without at least some to sit with. The sooner the better, as waiting would only make it more difficult to make friends, and he feared that him blacking out yesterday would not help this situation. Finally, he stood in front of the lunchroom's entrance and swallowed nervously. He entered, grabbed some lunch and wandered around a little. There was a constant stream of chatter around him, forming together as a single wail of noise. However, Izuku could still hear the occasional mention of his name, and he caught a couple people staring. Only now did he realize how much his lone student status would sabotage his social life. All of a sudden he realized he was staring at a person, and that person had caught him staring. Quickly he looked away, saw an empty seat and sat down there, putting his lunch tray on the table. As he looked ahead of him, he realized he was staring at somebody else once more. Thinking quickly, he forced out a quick hello. The person in front of him simply continued to stare as he replied, "Oh, hi, I guess." Izuku promptly smashed his head into the table out of embarrassment. The fact that he, instead of hitting the table, face planted into his lunch wasn't helping. Shinso wasn't sure what was happening. One moment he was enjoying his lunch, and the next moment the famous lone student from one ad in front of him and smashed his face into his lunch. Feeling a painfully awkward silence come up, he decided to continue upon his earlier greeting. "Are you okay?" "I'm not." The wild bush of dark green curls spoke up. The student got his face out of his food, wiped it clean and looked around. "Are you?" Slightly insulted, Shino reacted. "Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be?" Green Eyes looked at him. "Well, we're having the same problem. We're both alone," the hero-to-be said, gesturing at the empty seats. At first Shinso was ready to defend his loneliness before he realized the greenette was right. He was sitting alone after all. So instead he went another way. "So, it's always been like this. I don't need anyone," he spat. The greenie in front of him looked hesitant at first, before sitting straight with a shock and sending him a beaming smile. "Do you want to be friends?" Green Eyes looked at him in a hopeful manner. "No." His unwanted lunch buddy promptly deflated. "Oh," and the awkward silence returned as Shinso continued eating, sometimes throwing a quick peek at his neighbor. "Why?" Shinso questioned. "Why did he have to sit at my table? At least he's eating his lunch now and not trying to wear it as a mask." He was getting annoyed at the green pest's insistence of staying as opposed to just leaving after sufficiently humiliating himself. Why couldn't this guy just leave him alone? The frustration built up until it finally hit its peak, and Shinso decided it was time for the greenette to leave. Must be nice to have such a powerful quirk. He almost hit himself, and did so mentally. "No, I wanted this guy to leave, not strike up an ideological discussion. I don't even know what his quirk is." The greenette, however, looked up at him and hummed. "I suppose, although it's not perfect, it's difficult to control. But hey, I am a late bloomer after all." Shinso quirked an eyebrow. "Late bloomer? What did that have to do with anything? Getting your quirk at 6 or at 4 shouldn't make a lot of difference." He decided to voice his thoughts. Izuku chuckled nervously. "Well, I didn't get my quirk at 4, 5, 6 or even 7. Not that he hadn't hoped at those ages that he'd still get a quirk. He wanted to be a hero so badly he'd always clung to false hope. "I got mine about half a month back or so." The wild-haired boy chalked on his breath. "Half a month? The entrance exam was half a month back. And you have to enroll into UA several months before that. Did this guy think he was quirkless while he signed himself up for that? Or did he already know he'd get his quirk before then?" He was shaken out of his thoughts when the hero course student continued. "Talking about quirks, what's yours?" "Oh boy, here we go. Brainwashing. I can put someone who verbally reacts to what I say under hypnosis and make them do what I want." The hero-to-be's eyes widened. "Here it comes. That's awesome. What? Just imagine being able to talk villains down, or get hostages to be released with the greatest ease. You'd be an amazing hero." Izuku instantly realized his slip-up. If you want to be." Shinso was quite surprised, to be honest. When he thought about the only student in WANA yesterday morning, he imagined a cocky twat, filled to the brim with overconfidence because he was supposedly the best of the best, what with WANA being seen as the betters of the heroics course. Then, after their first meeting, he hadn't been sure what to think of him, but it wasn't exactly positive. But to be the first to actually say he could be hero after he found out Shinso's quirk. Shinso was spooked out of his thought process by a screeching alarm. He could only wonder out loud what was going on as every student in the lunch hall started rushing the emergency exit. "It's a Type 3 alarm," a nearby older student helpfully supplied. "It means there are intruders on the school grounds. I've never experienced it before though." Izuku and Shinso decided it was better to follow suit and head towards the exit as well. Problem was, the hallway leading to the exit was incredibly cramped with panicking students. It would take forever for them to get out of here. Izuku sighed. This could take some time. Izuku was brimming with excitement. Even though he was 15 minutes late to class because of the alarm, his homeroom teacher was 20 minutes late. After he came in, he told Izuku to put on his hero costume and meet him outside the building. Once the bunny-dressed boy was outside, Aizawa told him to enter the bus the green-haired boy hadn't seen yet, and they quickly drove off. Once inside the bus, the homeroom teacher explained what would happen. "USJ would happen." Izuku couldn't wait. This was why he'd wanted to become a hero, saving people. After a couple of minutes in the bus, Izuku realized something. "Ooh, sir, isn't there a Class 1B?" he asked. Aizawa, not bothering to take his head out of his improvised pillow of bandages, answered, "Yes, why?" "Well, shouldn't I have practical lessons with them?" Aizawa groaned but still got his head out of his capture gear and looked at Izuku. "I can see why you would think that, but 1A and 1B have always been rivaling classes, and therefore will not work together apart from class versus class fights." "Oh, I see. Well, wait, class versus class fights. I'll have to fight against 1B at one point." As Izuku was having his own little mental breakdown, the grumpy pro hero turned his back to his pupil. Add in the principal's curiosity about what would happen if one student is mentored by a bunch of pro heroes without any other kids to distract them. For an ex-lab rat, he sure does love experimenting. Finally, they arrived at the USJ. Izuku looked at it with stars in his eyes before noticing a not-so-far-off figure in a spacesuit. The Here 13. With his black hole quirk, he can create a vortex that turns anything it sucks into dust. The quirk is activated by releasing the fingertips on. Izuku was swatted over the head by a grumpy Aizawa and told to hurry up and stop daydreaming. The red-eared boy quickly went up the steps onward to his exciting, but of course, safe-saving training. 13, 14.17. No, 16 should be about right. Oh wait, but then I'd forget. Wow, there sure are a lot of things to remember about being a hero. Izuku's sweat dropped as number 13 simply continued on counting the many aspects of being a hero. Whatever hope Izuku had for an inspiring speech was slowly dying an ugly death. Disappointingly, All Might wasn't here. Apparently he used up his 3 hours after fighting some minor crimes. At least, that's what Aizawa-sensei had said. It was nice being able to talk so openly about All Might and his weakness with his teachers and no other students around to tiptoe around. Izuku felt like if he had to be super secretive about this and tell none about this, he might die early of stress. The 3 of them had already entered the USJ, and Izuku was gobsmacked by the amount of work that had been put into the humongous building. He couldn't wait to try out OFA in the mountain range-like terrain, although he would rather not go for the burning city anytime soon. A single missed jump could make me roasted seaweed, he thought nervously, while 13 continued his never-ending speech that was probably going nowhere anyway. If the groaning of his sensei was anything to go by, Izuku looked over the rest of the terrains. Let's see, Plain City Ruins. That looks like it could be a post-landslide. Urban neighborhood. Is that a swimming pool with a water slide? Actually, I wonder how well I could swim with AFO. That place looks like it's just rainy all the time. Not very dangerous, but looks can be deceiving. And then there's just, Aizawa-sensei. The greenette started. I think there's something wrong with the fountain. True enough, a strange black miasma had appeared in front of the fountain on the main plaza. Crap. Villains. Aizawa said loud enough to knock 13 out of his speech. Suddenly, the black mist started spinning until it resembled a vortex. A single white hand came forth from the middle of the darkness and, to Izuku's shock, a man followed. Next followed something that Izuku would definitely not call a man. He grimaced as he looked at the giant hulking black creature, its brain exposed. Lines of teeth looking more like wood splinters made from bone formed a terrifying grin. Said grin, however, didn't reach the creature's beady fish-like eyes. While the first man looked intimidating with his body covered in detached hands, his face hidden by one gripping his face, making it so that his only defining facial feature were his red eyes. He had nothing on that monstrosity. When both strangers had left the probably a portal, it itself started convulsing and shrinking until it was about the size of the monster itself and grew 2 electric yellow eyes. What's this now? Where's All Might? Our info said he'd be here. The hand-wearing man exclaimed. All we have here is a wannabe astronaut and a little twerp. At least Eraserhead's here. But where is All Might? Aizawa wasted no time. 13, on me. Midoriya, go back to the school and get help. Izuku's eyes widened. What? And leave you here? But you'd be outnumbered. I can. Not now, Midoriya. Aizawa barked back. You're not trained for this yet. Besides, we might need those reinforcements. Somehow no alarms have gone off and they need to know. Although he didn't like it, Izuku nodded and got ready to leave through where they entered. He'd have to trust his sensei on this. But before he could make a single step, a familiar black miasma appeared and barred the path to the entrance. I apologize, but I'm afraid I can't let that happen. A deep and rich voice came forth from the black mist. You see, we are the League of Villains, and we are here for one thing only. He paused dramatically. To kill the symbol of peace, All Might. Kill All Might. But that's impossible. What do they have that could possibly compare to the number 1 hero? Izuku's mind wandered involuntarily back to the Black Titan. There's no way. That's why it's a pity he isn't here. The miasma continued smoothly. Oh well, maybe he'll appear if we were to torture and kill you. It'll certainly teach him not to miss an appointment again. Oh, and as for you, Mr. Eraserhead, Master Tamura would like to meet you. He's a fan. Aizawa didn't like the way the mist had said fan, but before he could react, he was whisked away, falling through a portal that appeared under his feet. Damn it, I waited too long for an opportunity to strike like some goddamn rookie, the hero thought as he fell through darkness. Now then, let's commence, shall we? The mist said as he turned to the two heroes left. Izuku, you need to get to UA and warn the other teachers right now. Go, I'll distract this guy. 13 quickly yelled at his student before taking position, ready to let loose his quirk. All right away, sir. Izuku yelled back as he summoned OFA throughout his body. When he finally got the river running after a few seconds, he took a run for the door, discussing strategy in front of the enemy and taking such a distasteful long time to get ready to execute it. How sad. You simply must be punished for such arrogance. The ethereal cloud sent long but fast tendrils of darkness at the running boy, but before they could reach him, 13 sprung into action and quickly sucked the attack up. It wasn't long until 13 had redirected his attack on the main body of the villain. Damn, I knew his quirk was strong, but it seems I still underestimated him. And being able to affect me on such a long distance is something I never expected, the dark spirit thought. Luckily, I still have a card up my sleeve. Without 13 noticing, he summoned a bit of miasma, just enough, behind the hero and was ready to turn the tide before he heard a yell. 13, watch out, Izuku yelled, standing halfway between 13 and the door, but he knew it would have no effect. Quickly, he took a short diagnosis of what he had on his body, found a relatively heavy first aid kit due to its compactness, grabbed it and threw it. Now, this shouldn't have done anything really. In any realistic world, the item would have simply flown through the darkness, not really hitting anything, and landing harmlessly on the other side of the mist wall. Luckily for Izuku, however, this world wasn't realistic, and the kit hit the iron neck brace hidden deep within the villain's body, doing quite the opposite of what it's supposed to do. The kit hit hard enough for the villain to temporarily lose his concentration and didn't manage to execute his attack before 13 had noticed it, and thus was able to break off his offense before it turned on him. After recovering from his brief yet intense neck pain, the villain turned to the first year. It seems I underestimated you, or rather, your luck, just as much as 13, boy. The Abyss said. Very well then, it seems I will have to take this fight up a notch. The declaration was followed by both 13 and Izuku being engulfed in a wall of black. Well, I can't say that this was what I was expecting to find when I scrolled through a random author's list of favorites, and I'm even more surprised that I haven't found it before. I do think that just Izuku will be kind of hard to do, what with a major part of MHA's charm being its cast. But I do think it would make sense. However, expelling all of them is sort of unwarranted. Aizawa didn't know that Ada had Recipro Burst, and that's the worst example. Bakugo may be a dick, but he's certainly not lacking in quirk application. What's C supposed to do to improve her scores, aside from more physical training? What did Yaoyorozu do wrong? Look, I think the concept is cool and I like the story, but I'm just saying there are a few flaws. Also, there's literally no reason not to put Shinso in 1A. Deku will be alone for 2 months, and if Shinso does just as well as in canon, he should be allowed to transfer. I mean, plot yes, but the story should not be a slave to the plot. Being engulfed by the black mist was weird. Despite its dense appearance, Izuku had no problem breathing. Neither did he feel or smell anything at first. But then he felt his footing disappeared and he became weightless. He only fell through darkness for a split second before being blinded by light. After his eyes got used to the light, he noticed he could feel wind streaking against his face and through his hair and gazed down a dazzling depth. As tears built up in his eyes, he realized he was falling at least 50 meters down and no plan nor idea to stop him from becoming a splatter on the concrete ground below. Wait, I can use OFA to slow me down by finger flicking the air below me. I don't know how well it'll work though, not to mention the backlash on the rest of my body. As he approached the ground further, the student decided it was better than dying here and now and pointed his finger to the ground, his hand forming an OK sign in a situation that was definitely not okay. Before he could enact his plan, however, he started falling to the side, the momentum of his vertical fall causing him to start spinning in mid-air whilst he flew horizontally over the rocks below him. After a few seconds, he finally collided with an object. Luckily for him, it was soft yet sturdy enough to break his fall. Once he came to from his vertigo-inducing nightmare flight, he heard a robotic voice ask him if he was all right. Izuku quickly looked up to see him staring into the eyes, or screen rather, of Pro Hero 13. He must have been teleported to this place as well. The boy deduced. I'm okay. The greenette continued out loud. Just a bit dizzy. How did you catch me? And where are we? Izuku looked around him as he stood next to 13 on a rooftop, abandoned and clearly unsafe building surrounding them. After putting the boy down, 13 looked around. I used my quirk to suck you towards me. Don't worry though, I've done stuff like that before and closed my fingertips on time to prevent you from actually being endangered by my quirk. The professional hero looked around him. It seems that villain brought us to the ruined zone. No doubt to counter my quirk. I won't be able to use it willy-nilly down in those streets, with the buildings around us being so unstable. Well said, 13. A familiar deep voice came from behind them. As they hastily turned around to face the mass of black mist, he continued talking. Whilst I don't know the boy's power, I have made backup plans to keep you in check at the very least. Now then, let's start the fight for real this time. To the sides of a pair of electric yellow eyes, two vortexes opened, their swirling pattern almost seeming to have a hypnotizing effect. Before Izuku could even think up a battle plan, two beams of an unidentifiable makeup shot out of the portals, destroying everything in their paths, hitting the ground, or roof, right in front of the two good guys. Debris and dust flying up into the air as once again the ground under Izuku fell away. And he continued falling, this time with companionship. As he fell down the alleyway in between two buildings, Izuku spotted a fire escape on the side of the adjacent building. Grabbing blindly, he managed to snag a hold and with his other hand quickly took 13's hand. As rubble and dust fell down around and on them, they could do little to shield or protect themselves in some way. As Izuku held onto the railing of the fire escape, he heard an ominous groan and could feel the iron ladder giving in. In a few seconds he was falling for a third time that day until both he and 13 landed harshly on the ground. As he felt himself impact onto the ground and lose all the air in his lungs, the young hero tried to roll with the fall as best as he could. And could too, for not a moment later a steel ladder along with some more rubble fell on the spot he had been previously occupying. There, covered in dust and cold mud from the ground, coughing his lungs out while trying to fill them back up again, laid Izuku. He quickly looked around him and saw 13 on the other side of the alleyway. He quickly ran towards the hero, hoping the professional knew what to do. 13, are you all right? Izuku asked quickly, helping the hero sit upright. The astronaut's visor was cracked, and their suit dirtied and almost ripped on multiple places. I'm all right, Midoriya, just a bit winded. The white-cladded humanoid shook their head. What about you? Izuku did a quick one-over. His own visor was cracked as well, and he decided to take it off for now. As much as it helped shield his eyes against the dust and falling debris, now it would only make it harder to see whilst wearing it. His suit was dirty and ripped much like 13's, but he'd live. I'm okay, just dirty, cold and drenched. Drenched? 13 stared at him. That's strange. The only water source in the ruins zone is underground in the sewer. My, you certainly are persistent. Before Izuku could react, he was pulled out of the way by 13. Barely dodging another destructive beam. Wordlessly, the two heroes decided it was best to run for now and quickly exited the alleyway onto the open street. If you think you'll give yourself a better chance of surviving by entering the open, you're wrong. The voice taunted behind them. Not needing to look, both heroes threw themselves to the side as another beam crashed onto the pavement before them. Izuku could only watch in horror as said pavement cracked and split open with water and chunks of rock flying everywhere. He needed to think. He needed OFA charged up as well, but he still needed a second or two for that. He quickly looked around and spotted a car. Maybe he could hide under it. He remembered what that beam did to the pavement and decided that he didn't want to be under a car if it were to be hit by such a beam. He heard a yelp only to turn around and see 13 having just as much trouble dodging the enemy attacks. He ran to 13 with a vague idea of a plan in mind. Once within speaking range, he decided to act. 13, cover me. Wait, what? 13 asked in surprise, but before he could inquire further, his student had already crouched behind him with a look of concentration on his face. Surprised by Izuku's plan he may have been, but he was a professional hero for a reason, and seeing no option to dodge the beams in fear of them hitting his student, he started sucking them up. Oh dear, hoping for a break in the middle of a battle. What a sad and pathetic boy you are, their attacker said out loud, and the amount of attacks was doubled and 13 could barely hold them at bay. I certainly hope you know what you're doing, Izuku. Out of nowhere, he was blindsided by beams shooting at him and his student from different directions. Right on time, however, he was pulled out of the way by our heroic main character. Clutching his teacher to his chest, the greenette ran away, too fast for the villain to keep up. You can run, but you can't hide. He decided to yell instead. He would catch up to them in time anyway. And that's my plan. What do you think? Izuku finally finished explaining his theories and ideas for countermeasures. After they had successfully escaped the Mist Man's barrage, they had found a suitable hiding place where they could rest up and come up with ideas, if only for a little while. 13 was gobsmacked. This boy had, in a matter of minutes, thought of a completely plausible theory on what the villain's attacks might be and had come up with a very good plan as to stopping the evildoer. Where other heroes had only ever thought about facing the enemy head-on with their full strength and nothing but their quirk to back them up, the boy hero in training in front of him had decided on a much more effective, if not less destructive, manner of defeating their enemy. After thinking the plan over and not seeing any obvious holes in it, he nodded in approval. Very well, I don't like the danger this puts you in, but we don't have very much choice. I'd prefer to say you don't have a choice at all. A victorious voice sounded. The two heroes barely had the time to jump out of their shelter before it was crushed a familiar attack. But instead of panicking, Izuku had the right mind to realize his plan would have to be put into motion now or never. He managed to force out. Not having dropped OFA since the last time he charged it up, he was having a breeze dodging the bad guy's attacks. I can keep this up all day. For a villain who thinks he's hot shit, you sure are slow. He made a small mental note to clean his mouth with water and soup after all of this was over. I'm sorry, Mom, but I don't have any other way of egging him on. The villain sighed. I always do enjoy crushing arrogant bugs. Normally, I'd go for the biggest threat here, which is not you, I assure you. But destroying you first would be more satisfying, if only to see your teacher in pain. After that morbid little speech, the space-breaking villain gave chase to the preteen. Izuku made sure to put on a little show of dodging the attacks that were thrown his way, while also not going too fast for the villain to lose him in between the rubble. Over time, Izuku started to slow down before diving into an alleyway. Once at the end of it, he turned around to face his attacker. Said attacker he decided to transform into a wall of black mist, completely blocking off any escape. Well, now, it seems you tired and trapped. Finally, ready to die. His thick, warm voice was filled with smug satisfaction. One more thing. Izuku breathed out in between fake gasps for air. Those beams, what are they? The darkness only chuckled. Well, I suppose it won't hurt to tell you. I'm sure you've already come to realize that my quirk allows me to make portals, yes. Well, that's just it. Portals. Portals I open at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. The water pressure down there is so strong. As soon as I open a portal, the water comes blasting out in a devastating fashion. Izuku looked at him in shock, before a massive grin formed on his lips. Really? Thank God. Otherwise, this would never work. 13. Now, on it. A voice sounded behind the wall of smoke. Kurogiri seemed to be put off by the conversation's end and the sudden entrance of the pro-hero behind him, but quickly recovered. I don't know what this is, but it won't matter if you're nothing but a bloody puddle. Kurogiri opened a portal and a beam of water shot towards Izuku, who at the very last minute dodged past the beam, allowing it to rush undeterred right into a street-wide fuse box, a common object in the city, generally used as node to connect streetlights to the city's power system, but also great for frying villains who played with water. The abyss screeched out in fury and pain as the electricity rushed through water into his ethereal-like body, completely paralyzing him on the spot. Meanwhile, Izuku was doing his best, hopping from wall to wall, trying to scale the buildings and leave the alleyway before the next part of his plan was set in motion. A loud groan from the old buildings indicated that 13 was a little more efficient than he had thought. As Izuku jumped over the black wall, which was still crying in pain, he landed next to 13, who had already used his quirk to remove big chunks from both buildings. The boys' plan came to a close as both buildings collapsed under their own pressure, falling down and burying anyone in the alleyway alive. After looking at the aftermath, Izuku turned to his sensei. You think that did him in? His teacher in turn looked at the boy. He's definitely unconscious or trapped, or we'd have already been blasted off our feet by now, but I'm not sure for how long. Let's just hope long enough for Back to arrive and officially arrest him. But there's no time to dilly-dally or dig him out now. We still need to help Senpai. Izuku nodded and followed his teacher back to the main plaza, hoping it was not too late to save his homeroom teacher. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.